Hello and welcome to another Applying Ethology webinar. I am Laura Whalen, a PhD student at the University of British Columbia, and I've been working with Christian Nauroth, Jen-Yan Chow, and Rachel Park to organize these webinars. As we begin today, I want to remind you all to please turn off your camera and your microphone. Should you have questions for our speaker, please type them into the chat box and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Today, I'm happy to welcome Avelyne S, who is the postdoctoral researcher at INRAE in France. She studies the importance of vocal communication in social behavior and has worked with birds, frogs, and pigs. She's currently focusing on vocal expression of emotional states in piglets, and today we'll be presenting humans, objects, or conspecifics. Piglets tell us what they prefer. So welcome, Avelyne.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for the introduction. So during the presentation, if you have any question for clarification, don't hesitate to ask them in the chat, and I will try to answer them during the talk. It may be more convenient than after. So I will be talking about vocal expression of emotion in piglets. Oh, Lele, sorry, that's my cat. I will be talking about like social relationship in piglets, human piglet relationship, and enrichments. So to introduce a little bit the subject, so we are in a webinar for animal welfare. So I guess you all know what it is, but what is important to say for me is that animal welfare is it's not just about reducing the negative context experienced by animals, but also enhance positive context experienced by them. So that's why it's important to monitor this positive context and to have an insight of what the pig is actually feeling and so positive emotions.
Avelyne, can I jump in? Can you make it full screen, please?
Oh no.
There we go. Great, thank you.
So how do we study emotions in animals? So we have this two-dimensional diagram. So to study an emotion, we usually talk about the valence. Is the emotion positive or negative, which is represented on the x-axis, and the arousal, which relates to the intensity of the emotion, if it's highly intense or not. So for example, joy will be positive emotion with a high arousal, whereas sadness will be a negative emotion with a low arousal. For several years now, it has been demonstrated that vocalizations and emotions are linked, especially in mammals. And there is this great review from Elodie Briefer from 2012 that is really nice to introduce this subject. And so I will be talking about pigs. So what do we already know on pigs?
Sorry, so Avelyne, to break in again, do you have figures for this? Like, could you click it forward a bit because we're just seeing introduction?
Oh, that's weird.
There we go.
So weird. Can you see, what do we know?
Just the title introduction. If you click forward, does it appear?
It's slide 3 now.
Maybe if we start back at the first slide. Yeah. And hit play. Oh no, it's just a gray slide.
So sorry, I have to.
No, it's okay. It was working just a few minutes ago.
Sorry. So stop sharing. Yes. Let's try something else. Let's make it to PDF. But I had two videos, so I'll just. Okay, and the two is okay. So mhm. Okay, let's do the sharing again. Hmm. Okay, can you see something?
Yes. Excellent.
Can you see?
Yep. Looks good.
And etc. Okay.
Thanks, Avelyne.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so where was I? Should I? Okay, I continue. About emotions and ping and vocal expression of emotions. So what do we know on pigs is that they, in their environments, they have social partners, that they are highly social species, and they have positive interactions with their social partners, and they also have humans in their environments. And so we can ask the question if it's a pseudo-social partner, for example. In terms of vocalization, we know that they use a variety of call types, from screams to bark to grunt, to low frequency grunts. And some vocalization types have been associated to positive and negative contexts already. And there is one particular vocalization that is a grunt, which is a low frequency vocalization that is basically the most used vocalization during like social interactions, and yet the least understood, because we can record grunts in a variety of contexts, positive or negative. So I will be focusing on these vocalizations. I will be asking two questions. So the first one is, how do piglets perceive a familiar human compared to a basic enrichment material? And in the second question, I will ask the question, how do piglets express their emotional state toward a human compared to conspecifics? And I will be seeking into behavioral and vocal expression of emotional states. Just quickly, a global method point, because during the entire presentation, it will be always the same methods. So to analyze the behavior, we manually score, and then we always use multivariate analysis to take into account some behaviors that are correlated to one another and to reduce the number of variables. And then so the PCs, for example, from a principal component analysis, as used as response variables in terms in linear models testing that reflects the experimental design. And so then you can just have presentation of one dimension or two dimension of the behavior. And in terms of acoustic analysis, so all the grunts have been manually extracted by an expert and automatically analyzed with our package called C-Wave. And with this package, we can actually extract some parameters that are possibly used directly, such as the grunt duration, like the call length, but also some spectral score. So here are two representations. So first, the grunt duration that is extracted from minimum amplitude in the call, the minimum threshold, and for the spectral analysis, you basically compute the spectrum of each vocalization. That is basically distribution of frequency, and then you can extract several parameters describing this distribution, such as the median, the mean, or the interquartile range, to have an idea of the bandwidth, plus other spectral parameters, such as noise parameters that are hard to illustrate on the screen. So this represents, so all computed in a PCA, for example, it represents a spectral score describing the frequency range and the frequency composition of one specific grunt. And then these scores are used in linear models to test our design. So let's go back to the questions. So the first question is, how do piglets perceive a familiar human compared to a basic enrichment material? So in the EU, we know that it's now mandatory to have environmental enrichments in farms, but yet it's not enough. And we can ask the question whether a human could be considered as a pseudo-social enrichment. So to test that, we use this experimental design. So on a group of 24 piglets, so each piglet was familiarized with both a human with multiple sessions of positive contacts. That is a protocol that has been published already. So we used exactly the same paradigm for taming the piglets. And they were also familiarized with an additional object, or manipulable object, for several sessions. And at the end of this taming period, they were subjected to two tests. The first one is a preference test with a triangular room with the two stimuli at the corner. And we basically asked the piglets what it prefers. So, a spoiler alert, we did not show, we didn't find any difference in terms of preference. So I won't be talking about that, but we ran another test, a basic isolation reunion test. So in these tests, so the piglet is alone in the room for 5 minutes, and then you actually change the phase to a reunion phase, either with a human. So you will have a human standing in the room, silent and immobile for 5 minutes. Or for a second day, the piglets will have the object instead of the human for 5 minutes. And on another day, the piglet will have basically nothing. So it will be like a negative control, because isolation for piglets is quite stressful. So we can compare these three treatments, these three conditions for each piglet. So we'll have the result on this one. And the prediction we had is that if the piglets perceive the object and the human differently, they should express a different spatial and vocal behavior. And we can add to this prediction is that if it's actually positive, having a stimulus, the human or the object, if it's positive, it should be different than the reunion with nothing, which is quite negative for them. So this is the results in terms of behavior first. So we had these two phases, isolation and reunion, with the three conditions, human, object, or no stimulus, and with two behavioral score. So the first one, which was correlated with less vigilance and less time away from the stimuli, and the other behavioral score, which was correlated with less time in the proximal zone, so less time close to the stimuli. So for the first score, we found that when piglets were reunited with one of the stimulus, one of the stimuli, either the human or the object, they spend less time being vigilant and they spend less time away from the stimuli. And the difference between isolation and reunion for the object and the human, we have a greater difference for the human, which we can hypothesis that the human may be more attractive. And for the other behavioral score, we found that when piglets were reunited with one of the stimuli, they spend more time close to it. So we have an attraction toward both stimuli, but the human may be more attractive. So now we can look at the vocal expression during this test. So for the first in the middle, the acoustic spectral score, which was correlated with lower pitched and less noisy grunts. So again, during the isolation, we have no difference between the conditions, human alone or the objects. Basically, they are alone. And when they are reunited with the stimuli, we found that they actually produce higher pitched and noisier grunts when they are with the human or with the object compared to being isolated. So a reunion increase the frequency range and the noisiness of the grunts. In terms of duration, we found that that only when they were reunited with the human, they actually produced shorter grunts, but it was not the case when they were reunited with the objects. So what can we conclude about this first study is that analyzing the acoustic features of grunts brings more information than the behavior, that we can separate the stimuli better using the acoustics. Compared to isolation, we found that human and object trigger higher pitched calls and noisier calls compared to isolation, I said, but only the presence of the human triggers shorter calls, and shorter calls have been associated with positive context. So maybe and only the human could trigger this type of calls. So this reinforces the need of pseudo-social experiences with like in the context of farming to increase welfare. And so let's move to the second question that I ask again. Could a familiar human be perceived as positively as social partners? If humans may be considered pseudo-social partners, what is the value of a human compared to other partners, like real social partners? So to answer these questions about like emotion regarding partners and humans, so we know that humans and conspecifics can trigger positive emotions. If, for example, if humans tam piglets, it's trigger positive situation, and a reunion with conspecific, it's really positive for a pig. We know that pigs are able to learn and anticipate situation, both positive and negative. And when they anticipate a situation, we know that anticipating amplifies emotions. So if we want to study vocal expression of emotion, maybe a context of anticipation is actually a good idea. So this is what we did. So we triggered anticipation, and we had 60 pigs, and they were trained to anticipate 2 reunions. So they were trained with a 2-way associative learning. So they were trained to anticipate a reunion with their pen mates, so conspecifics, and they would remain with their pen mates for 2 minutes as a reward. And they learned to anticipate a reunion with a familiar human. and they would stay with the human for 2 minutes with with active positive contacts from the human to the piglets if they would consent to it. So the learning paradigm was really simple with the spatial cues, with auditory cues, and visual cues. So the idea was not, can the pigs learn? We wanted to test the anticipation. So at the end of the conditioning, the question was, can you anticipate the reunion with your penmates or with your humans in terms of behavior and vocal expression? So here in this paradigm, the reunion with the penmates was a highly positive context with supposedly a high arousal, and we cannot really manipulate that, but we can manipulate the familiarity and possibly how positive the human is toward the piglets. So before the conditioning, we actually performed a taming period, but only half of the pigs were tamed with repeated positive contacts from the human in the home pen with several sessions. So we have two groups at the end of this taming period. So so at the end of the taming period and at the beginning of the conditioning, we have these two reunions. For the conspecific is highly positive, so V positive for valence, so a positive valence with a high arousal for piglets. And at the beginning of the conditioning, the H plus group that was tamed supposedly as like perceive positively the human already with a relatively low or high arousal that we cannot really tell. But the other group, the age group that received just the minimum contacts with the human, they may perceive the human as negative and with a different arousal. So that's at the beginning of the conditioning. But at the end of the conditioning, oh la la, sorry. Okay. At the end of the conditioning, we expect both groups to have a positive valence, a positive perception of the human, because during the conditioning, the human actively tamed the piglets. But we expect a difference in terms of intensity. So we expect a higher intensity in the H plus group that had more experience with the human than the H group. So how did we promote anticipation in those peaks? So basically, when you want to trigger anticipation during a learning paradigm, you actually increase the duration of the signal announcing the reward. So the duration of the signal was gradually increased along the conditioning from the first to the 12th trial. And so only the last trials were analyzed to test anticipation, only the trials with 20 seconds of signal. So basically you have along the conditioning from the first for the last trials that were analyzed for anticipation. For one trial you have a pre-signal isolation phase. So the pig actually remain in the room waiting for something. Then the signal comes, which starts the anticipation phase for 20 seconds. And when the signal stops, the reunion starts and the partner enter the room. So with that, you can test differences between the pre-signal isolation phase and the anticipation phase. But since we wanted to test for a positive anticipation, we needed another test. So for one trial, the 12th and last trial, instead of reuniting the partner right after the signal, as expected, we actually delayed the arrival of the partner. So this test was actually a discrepancy from expectation tests. So if the piglet learned, it expects the partner to enter, and delaying the partner trigger a negative state in the piglets. So that's the prediction. So if the piglets anticipate, we expect different reactions between the several phases. And if the piglets anticipate positively, we expect different reaction during anticipation and the post-signal isolation. Last, if familiarity toward the human is important, then we expect that the age group differ from the age plus group. So these are the results. So I won't go into detail with the behavioral results, but I have two videos, two short videos to show you. For that. So with the first video, sorry, I hope you can see it. So for the first video, you can see the room. So you can see the piglets. So the piglets is so that's the pre-signal isolation phase. The piglet is just waiting for the signal to come. Then you have so the lights turn on. That announces the entrance of the human partner on this side of the room. And so the piglet approaches the door, waiting for the lights to turn off, and the human enters the room, sits on a bucket, and actively pets the piglets. So with a soft voice and contacts. What happens when the piglets are expecting conspecifics? So that's the second partner. So you have the lights come on, and so that's the anticipation phase. So during the entire signal, that's the anticipation phase. So the piglet does not know when the lights actually go off. So it's just waiting, and then the partners and the conspecifics, the penmates, enter the room, and they will remain together for 2 minutes. So in terms of behavioral analysis, the statistics show that they actually have a higher intensity, a higher expectation when they actually when they expect conspecifics than human. In terms of vocal anticipation, because that's something that's what interests me. So we have two parameters. So the duration of grunts on the left side. So the phases of the trial is that neutral. So it's -1 is the pre-signal phase, which is supposedly neutral. In yellow, you have the anticipation phase, which is supposed to be positive. That's our hypothesis, at least for one of the conspecifics. And phases 1, 2, and 3, it's for the last trial when we actually delayed. And so 1, 2, 3 is for 20-second segments during the post-isolation. The post-signal isolation phase. So you have on the left side a grunt that is representative of the grunts produced during the pre-signal isolation phase, for which we do not have any difference between the two partners, conspecifics or a human. During the During the anticipation phase, we have a difference between partners. So the piglets actually increase the duration of their grunts when they expect a human, and they tend to decrease, but it's not significant. They tend to decrease the duration of the grunts when they expect conspecifics. And what happens when the partner is delayed during, so that's supposedly a negative because it's supposed to be a frustrating state, frustrating phase of the test. And for that, we see that the duration of the grunt increase and is similar as when they actually expect a human. So what we see here is that the temporal structure of the grunts when they expect a human is actually similar as when they are frustrated not being reunited with conspecifics. So they actually, so we may conclude that they actually anticipate negatively the human compared to the conspecifics. On the right side of the screen, you have the spectral score, which was so correlated. So the higher the score, the higher pitched the grunts. And the lower the score, the noisier the grunts. So again, we have no difference during the pre-signal isolation phase. But when they actually anticipate, we see a difference between the type of partner with higher pitched call when they anticipate a human and noisier calls when they anticipate conspecifics. And when they were supposed to be reunited, but they were not, when the partner was delayed, they came back to values of the spectral score similar as before the signal. So the conclusion so between conspecifics and human, so we found, we found that they were actually able to anticipate differently their conspecifics and the human, and both anticipatory behavior and vocal expression were different. And despite the piglets had positive interactions with the human before and or during the conditioning, they still anticipate the human negatively. So that we may think one hypothesis for that is that when they have two situations, one maybe there are two positive situation, but they actually classify. And so when they have a human compared to conspecific, it's quite frustrating already. So, and this frustration may be expressed in their vocal expression. And when we consider our two groups, H and H+, we have no drastic difference. We have a long-term difference, but it's not an interaction with the phases of with the anticipation phase. So we can ask the question whether the human was really positive in that experiment, or if the age group that was not timed before the conditioning actually catch up, and so we don't, and they're just as familiar as the H+ group. So to answer this question, so we actually had planned that before, and so this is like the experimental approach that you already saw. But actually, we had two other tests. So before the conditioning and after the conditioning, all the piglets were subjected to standard isolation reunion test. So with the human. So this is supposed to check if the timing treatment was actually okay, and how effective the conditioning was to trigger positive interactions with the piglets. So when we study the behavior during this isolation reunion test, so we have two PC, two behavioral scores. So the first one was correlated with a lower latency to contact the human, less time watching the human, more approaches to the human, more time closer to the human, and more investigation of the human. Whereas the over PC, the over behavioral score, was correlated with a fewer number of looks to the human, less time watching it, less time investigating the human, but more time investigating the room. So this is how the group are in this two-dimensional plots. So before, it's before the conditioning, and after is after the conditioning. And so what we see is that after the conditioning, on the first behavioral score, we have a similar attraction toward the human for both groups. But when we consider the same behavioral score, we have an intermediate attraction for the H plus group before the conditioning compared to the H group. So this means that we actually were able to build these two groups with different familiarity toward the human before the conditioning. And what we found on the second behavioral score in orange is that after the conditioning, the H plus group spend more time investigating the room. In terms of, if we interpret that, we may think that they are losing interest in the human, and this was only for the H plus group, so the group that had the most experience with the human. That's for vocal expression. Just quickly, what we see is that during the reunion with a human, as we saw during the first study, actually, we have a decrease in the grunt duration. So the piglets actually produce shorter grunts when they are reunited with the human, and we have an interaction with when when they are tested. So before in black and after in below. And actually we saw that statistic found that there were greater changes in the H group than the H plus group. And last, and yes, that's here. So greater changes in the H group than the H plus group. Oops. That's for the spectral range. So during the first study, we found that when they were reunited with a human or with the object, so supposedly positive, they were producing higher pitch calls. And this is actually what we found again. So when they're reunited with the human, the grunts are higher pitched and noisier. So that's the C panel, the C on the panel. And on the right side, we see that there is an interaction with the treatment, so that the difference between before and after is actually greater in the H plus group than the H group. So this is preliminary results. It's just we are still trying to understand that. So to conclude, so humans, even when providing repeated positive contacts, are definitely not conspecific, because even when they have a positive interactions with the humans, they still anticipate the human negatively compared to conspecifics. But being with a human is more reassuring than being with a basic object, material enrichments after a stressful situation. So that's what we found after with the first study, comparing human and object. In terms of vocal expression, we found consistent changes. So the changes we have in grunt features are actually consistent between experiments with different pigs. So that's pretty reassuring. And so vocal expression brings more information on piglets' perception of their environment than just looking at their behavior. And so this brings us to a nice perspective to build a non-invasive tool using acoustics to monitor welfare in farms. So that's actually the Soundwell project that's just that it's just finished, and the study was actually funded by that. So thank you for your attention, and thank you to Céline Tallet, my main collaborator, and actually she actually hired me on the project. So thank you, and thanks to Carole Guérin and Patrick Toinel for technical support, and the UE3P, who is taking care of the breeding and raising the pigs, and to you for your attention. Thank you.
Well done, Avelyne, and thank you so much for sharing your research. For everyone, if you could type in any questions you have into the chat box, we will get to them. But to get us started, a question for you to kind of bring it more into an applied aspect. Now that it seems like there's quite a lot of evidence to suggest that pigs really like to be with their friends that are also pigs. And so looking forward and into farming systems, would you say that, like, yes, they should be with conspecifics, but they should also not be regrouped? And how, like, should we be managing them with less human interaction? Or is some human interaction still something that the pigs find fulfilling?
Sorry, can you just repeat?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so it seems from your study that the pigs really like to be with other pigs that they know. And so would you say, by taking this information about the acoustics and about their anticipatory behavior, and looking at it more from an applied perspective, when we look at farming systems, should we have pigs in consistent groups? And then also, should we be minimizing actually the human interaction, or do pigs still need do they still find some fulfillment by being with people?
Oh, so actually, pigs do like being with so if yes, piglets. So the pigs like to be in social groups. So that's the first thing. And where in terms of management, what is hard now in the farming system is that we have large groups of pigs, and usually the groups are rearranged when they're growing. And this is actually tricky because you have like hierarchy that is supposedly negative for them sometimes, or for some of them. But what we found is that you can actually have positive interactions between people and piglets. It has been shown in terms of behavior. They are very curious, and in terms of behavior, there are studies showing in terms of physiology, behavior, and now acoustics that it's not nothing to be with people. It's better than a lot of it's better than social isolation, for example. And it's better than just having manipulable objects. It may be better than just having. So in terms of applied, if we would like to take this research into the policies, for example, maybe we could suggest to like basically reduce the number of pigs and have and allow farmers to have more time with their pigs to better understand the hierarchy, for example. And so that would be
Yeah, on that topic, and just
scientific. I don't know.
On that
Right.
topic, and just for curiosity, the people that were petting the pigs and talking softly to them, like, yes, that was the treatment, was to be nice to the pigs, but did they leave the trial being like, oh, like that was like a nice time, nice experience to be able to just be with the pigs? Like, do you think so what I'm trying to get at is, do you think if farmers just took time to be with the pigs and petting them, that there would be a different relationship?
Yeah, possibly. Um, what what we found, what we actually what we're trying to figure out is how fast it is to have like a positive or neutral, but at least not negative relationship between people and pigs. We're trying to we're actually studying the reunions during the conditioning. So every time the piglets were reunited with their human for 2 minutes along the conditioning, we are trying to figure out how fast the attraction and the vocal parameters change. Um, so yeah, I think it can be possible. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but um, yeah, I'm not sure.
No, yep, that was good. Lucy says, really interesting study, thank you. I wanted to ask, in your anticipation test, was this room soundproof so they couldn't hear their conspecifics outside?
Yes, actually, the room was built to be soundproofed. Actually, on the video, you can see like the white panel on the side, and so we soundproofed the room as much as possible because we had a lot of doors in this room, and every time you have a door, you have a leak, a sound leak.
Yeah.
So we tried, and the penmates that were supposed to enter the room, they were located like 2 doors apart. So they were like so they could not hear, or at least if they can hear something, they can also hear the human on the other side. So they could hear as bad, I would say, or as well, at least both partners.
Great. Jenyan says, hi, Evelyn. Thanks for the very interesting talk. I may have missed it at the beginning, but how did you select the conspecifics to make sure their interaction and presence is perceived as positive? As we know, the relationship between individual pigs may be different. Thank you.
Yeah. That's yes. I didn't say. So it was actually penmates. So they were sisters. So they were raised together before winning, and they were selected from their brood to form a group of 3 piglets. So they were actually sisters. So they know each other very well, and so we expect them to have a positive. At least the hierarchy is known, and it's at least positive for them to be reunited with the penmates.
Great. Irene says, thank you for the interesting talk. Rather than classifying the humans as quote unquote negative compared to conspecifics, can the contact be also seen as less important to them, but not negative? Maybe the vocalization in 1, 2, 3 moment, the frustration, is not per se negative, but back to baseline.
It's actually not back to baseline. So negative may be a strong word, like to define, like a negative anticipation, maybe like a strong word, right? Um, but it's actually not baseline because when you, at least for the duration, for example, so when they are frustrated, when the partner is delayed, they actually produce like really long grunts, similarly to when they expect the human. And these longer calls were not recorded before any signal came. And in the experiment, our baseline is this initial phase when they know something's gonna happen, but they don't know what, if it's the conspecific or the human. So this phase before the synod may be more considered as a baseline than the phase 1, 2, and 3 when the partner is delayed. So I'm not sure. So that's for grunts, but for spectral features, they do back to baseline because they do come back to parameters that were that that are similar to the, the, the pre-signal isolation phase. So I'm not sure it's baseline, um, but 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 yes, rather than characterizing as negative, which is really strong, maybe it's less important. Yes, maybe it's just yeah, it could be better. I could have could be my conspecifics, and it's just my human. Could be better, maybe.
Great. Just to see if there's more questions that are going to be typed. Another question for you, more thinking more broadly. Given your experience and your results, where do you see your research going? Like, what questions did you have pop up after this work?
So directly after this work, I would go further into the contacts the human is actually initiating, and so more focused on the what the human is actually doing and what are the gestures, voice, or visual cues, or I don't know, that are the most efficient to trigger positive relationship. And interestingly, during this second experiment with um, the sorry um, yes, during the second experiment with the anticipation, we were actually two humans. So we had each of us had the batch of piglets, and for some tests, especially the test before and after the conditioning, we had an effect of the human identity. So even if we tried to monitor ourselves to do exactly the same thing, we're still not the same humans. So I would like to go further into what makes the relationship better, faster. That's the first one. And in terms of and as bioacousticians, what the next step would be? Okay, so they can express differently and positive and negative emotions with their grunts. Could it be understood by the others? So basically, can they discriminate these calls within familiar or non-familiar, for example, and would be an emotional contagion possible using just like vocal signals, for example? That would be more on the perception side because I've been on the production vocal production side. So.
Well, Avelyne, thank you so much for your time and for sharing such an interesting project. Anticipation is a hard one to capture, and it seems like you've done a great job of doing that. So thank you so much for your time today, and best wishes with whatever's coming next.
But thank you for organizing this webinar, and thank you all for following the talk. That's really nice.